years there, meeting many inspiring people. So I consider myself very lucky. So many of you are youth workers. In fact, I think the majority of the audience is youth workers. And Jarlath has spent a long time training us and training many of you. And some of you are probably here just because it is Jarlath Benson. But for me, I wanted to spend a bit of time today as part of this, finding out about Jarlath the man and not Jarlath the therapist. We will have a wee look at that, the therapist, but for me it's really important to find out a wee bit about him, because I spent so much time in his training sessions and I had millions of questions and I wanted to ask him about his life. And I thought, well, that's probably not the place. He's here for us. But I hope today we will get a chance. So Jarlath, for me, first question. In your book, Working More Creatively with Groups, now in its 4th edition, you talk about the first group that we're introduced to from birth as our family. How was your childhood? How's your childhood life?
What a great question. Of course, that's where we start from, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you're right. I do place a lot of emphasis on the first group that we experience, which is our family group, because that's the practice group. That's the group where we get to practice competition, sharing, interaction, all those very important social skills and emotional, psychological skills. And that becomes the template for all our group interactions subsequently. But I suppose to answer your question, what was my childhood like? Well, my family really was the predominant influence in my early childhood and into my teens. I'm the eldest of 4 boys. So I suppose right from the beginning, I was used to being a leader, an influencer, someone who could tell the others what to do, whether they liked it or not. My parents. It wasn't the happiest home to grow up in. It wasn't the happiest group, that first group. It wasn't dreadful by any means. There was a lot of disappointed people in that family. Parents who were disappointed in each other. There was occasional violence, some addiction, a lot of depression. So when I look back, I can see where, as a therapist, I was formed, interested in, I think what I've been really interested in all my life, why do good people do bad things? People who start out well-intentioned, who love each other, who want to create a good environment, and things become a bit sour, become wounded. So I think my childhood, as I say, while not terribly unhappy, was sort of very much influenced by those sorts of factors that I'm talking about, which all of which had an impact on me, and I think really formed, and we might get around to talking about this a bit more, really influenced what drew me to groups. Because my first group wasn't a terribly functional group, wasn't very dysfunctional. I know I'm sounding a bit cautious there. I also want, because there was a lot of love and care, and I want to be respectful. But I also, as I say, looking back, I can see where the group worker and the therapist were formed, and why I was drawn to initially working with children, trying to help children who were traumatized and wounded. So good bits and bad bits, but certainly very influential.
Yeah. And what about your teenage years then? Is there stuff, significant events that stand out for your teenage years, or significant people, inspirational people?
Inspirational people, I suppose my first significant person, I would say, not inspiring. I think my first significant person was my maternal grandmother. She wasn't inspiring because she wasn't a terribly warm individual, rather a stern lady. She was a vice principal in a country school. But why she was significant was she introduced me to reading and encouraged me to read. She gave me what used to be then a silver sixpence for every book I read. And I read voraciously, not because I wanted to be rich and have a collection of silver sixpence, but why she was significant was because I think, looking back, she was like a priestess initiating me into a mystery, the world of books and knowledge. I mean, I am so indebted. I think probably I would say she's easily one of the most significant influences on my life, because through her, I was able to access a whole range of books that she had access to as a teacher. And subsequently in my life, you know, I have friends that I've made in books from different cultures, different times, knowledge, learning, seeing the world through different eyes and the thoughts of great writers, been very, very influential. I think, you know, in teenage years, my teachers, my school teachers were very influential. I'd been taught by Christian brothers from primary school. Now, one or two I found were nasty and ugly, but the majority that I met were very dignified. They had authority. They had knowledge and learning. They introduced me to learning. They weren't great group workers. You know, they were very disciplined, but I was very impressed by them.
Yeah.
I think in my early teens, I joined my local youth club, which had just been set up. And there were several youth workers there who had a huge influence on me. Yeah. Again, men, I'm sorry this is so male oriented, apart from my wonderful granny. But the man who started the youth club, who later went on to be head of youth services in Northern Ireland, very calm, kindly man. A couple of other men who were very impressive. And in a way, what I got from them, Gary, was as a youngster, I was quite angry and quite anti-establishment. And my youth club provided me, and these men provided me with authorities that I could collide with, fight with, who weren't going to shout back, who could understand, who could take it. And they encouraged me to channel my adolescent aggression into constructive ways. And so what they did was they encouraged me to start up a junior youth club. So at a fairly early age, 14, 15, I started up a junior wing of the youth club, which was open to children up to 11 when they then joined the senior club. And they encouraged and supported me in that. And obviously, obviously it was very successful, Gary. So gradually they brought me increasingly into the leadership team. And eventually I came to run that youth club, even though I never trained as a youth worker. I have no qualification as a youth worker. It was basically experience, and as I say, some of those influences from my home life, being and that first group that I had experience of. So lots of interesting people along the way, and then of course as an adult, huge number of influential people. But
okay, so why social work? Was this because of the family life? Was this because of
work? Yes, but there's a step in between.
Okay.
I went to university and really didn't do well at university. Couldn't really cope with the university life, perhaps because of the sort of schooling I'd had, perhaps because of the sort of family influences, and got sort of waylaid by acid. And this is in the late 60s.
Mm-hmm.
So I got waylaid by all the sort of temptations of student life, failed my degree. I failed my degree first time round. So I had to get a job. So because I'd got this youth work experience, I got a job with the Northern Ireland Adventure Playground Association in Divis Flats. They had a unit in Divis Flats. So I was well used to working with very small children, and so they employed me. I then began to develop a senior youth wing in that unit, and worked there for a couple of years. Really, really enjoyed it. This is nearly 50 years ago, Gary. 1972. So you can imagine.
I was born.
That was before you were born.
That was the year I was born.
The troubles were very, very bad at that time.
Yeah.
Really bad, and I saw all sorts of dreadful things and experienced terrible things. But I was always fortunate in that I didn't live there. I could, at the end of my shift, at the end of my working day, I could leave and go home to relative calm and stability. But how that came to an end was really quite traumatic, because I'd got permission to take a group of young people from the youth club off on an outdoor pursuits weekend with the regiment, the British Army regiment, who was stationed in Divis at the time. So you can imagine the negotiations that had to go on around that. Anyway, I took them off, and we had a fantastic experience. Can't remember, was it a weekend or a week? Might have been a week. Anyway, we had a wonderful experience. It was great. I came back. The following week, there was a bomb explosion in one of the first floor where the lifts used to be in the old Divis tower blocks. Practically underneath was the youth club. And of course, I rushed up with everybody else. The place was full of smoke, screams, awful, awful, hellish scene met me. A group of soldiers, a platoon of soldiers, had been caught in a bomb explosion. And it was gruesome, horrible, and it really broke my heart, because these could have been some of the soldiers who'd been with us in the pursuit. So that really finished me. I found that very, very difficult to cope with. I was angry, ashamed, disgusted, traumatized. Mm-hmm. So I finished my work very quickly, went back to university, got my degree, and reapplied, finished my degree. And towards the end of that, someone said, I was talking with someone one day, and someone said to me, you'd be a very good social worker. And I said to him, what's social work? He says, I don't know, but you'd be a very good social worker because you've done all that youth work. So it was as fortuitous as that. I then, at that stage, we're talking 74, 75, there was enormous amounts of money being plowed into community relations commission, developing social services, developing youth work. All of these things had been very, barely existing, if at all. Community Relations Commission didn't exist. So a lot of emphasis on community healing, community relations, youth work services. All the leisure centers were developed around this time. So there's a lot of money. So it was very easy in those days to get into social work. They would take anybody. It took me. So I trained as a social worker. But so that's part of the story. But I think what social work gave me was a language for working with youngsters that I've been searching for. in my early days, youth work was typically table tennis, snooker tables, musical shows, drama, debates, very program oriented, very content oriented. And I was always as a youth worker, I was always searching for something a bit more depth.
Okay.
But I couldn't quite sort of articulate what that was, what that was about. And I think what social work gave me was a language that provided me with a scaffold for my subsequent professional development. What social work emphasized for me in those early days was something about the use of self. What I took away from my social work training was how do we use ourself in our encounter with other human beings? How do we use ourselves to attune, to make empathic connections with other people, to pick up what might be going on in the other person and being communicated by what gets stirred up in us? So that was really very helpful, that sort of emphasis on the use of self. So as a social worker, I tended to get all the children and young people onto my caseload. And the reason being, social workers in those days did not like to work with children or young people. They were frightened of them. Often because social workers themselves had difficult childhoods and difficult adolescence. And so were fearful of meeting that in the young people that they were working with. And I was working in a childcare team. So inevitably, because I wasn't anxious around children or angry adolescents, they tended to be referred to me. After a period of time, the social services district that I was working in decided to create an experimental family centre called Mill Green. Now, why it was experimental was because we covered the whole statutory age range from 0 birth to 17. And why we developed that was because at that time there was massive urban overspill as a consequence of the Troubles. People had been burned out of their homes, people had been there was huge population shifts in the city of Belfast as a consequence of the Troubles and the ongoing Troubles. So people were moving out to places like Craigavon, out to the suburbs of Belfast, new towns, suburbs were being developed. And we were, in my district, which was Newton Abbey, we were being overwhelmed by distressed, traumatized youngsters and their families. So this experimental family center was set up to work with youngsters and in particular young people, and as I say, we covered the age range 0 to 17. That's where I first began to develop the therapeutic use of groups.
Yeah.
I worked with groups of children, mixed boys and girls, from 4 to 7 years of age, 8 to 10, 11 to 13, 14 to 17. Weekly sessions, 2-hour session for 9 months. Now, none of this was researched. I wasn't trained to work with children and youngsters. It was basically intuition, my youth work experience. And again, I stress I wasn't even qualified as a youth worker. So it was basically flying by the seat of my pants. I knew there was something about groups that was really important to bring. We were coping with such numbers that really group work was an economy and a good economy, an economic use of scarce resources. And again, as I say, because of my youth work experience, I was in an ideal opportunity and situation to bring together groups of children. And it was very successful for a number of years. And again, these were children from as young as 4, as I say, right the whole way through. They were in trouble with the law, they were in trouble with school, difficulties at home. traumatized by the troubles, all that you can imagine, having to leave your home, your community, relocate to a new place. So that was a place and a time where, again, I began to learn basically from experience. At that stage, we're talking 75, 76, 1976, for the next few years. There were no group work courses. You couldn't learn to be a group worker. There was no place to go to learn to be a group worker. Texts were very poor, usually American, dealing with gangs in Chicago, the east side of Chicago, big, heavy tomes. You couldn't read them. There weren't people to go to. So it was flying by the seat of my pants. And I'm sure you've heard me say many, many times, I learned to do group work there by messing up groups. So many groups collapsed. I mean, initially, this is where I learned about the importance of being crystal clear about the contract that I make with the groups that I work with, and that contract, that psychological skin, as I talk about it, is organic. I keep going back to it because it provides me with the entree into the process levels. But I used to say to youngsters, "Oh, would you like to come down to my center and we'll go paintballing, we'll go surfing, we'll play table tennis, have a weekend away in Dublin?" And they'd say, "Yeah, great, no problem." So I would bring them down and then get them in a circle and say, "Now, tell me about your relationship with your mother." They'd freak. They'd swing from the lamps, the windows would be burst. Oh, dreadful. And
again, F off, mister.
Yeah, worse than that. And it wasn't as if there were a lot of people, there wasn't anybody to guide me. I mean, obviously I had line management and so on, but I was making it up as I went along. And so gradually I realized the simplest thing to do was to go to the children who were referred to me and say, "Look, I hear you're having trouble at school," or "I understand you're having difficulties at home with mum and dad," or whatever the situation was. "Would you be interested in meeting with other young people your age who have similar difficulties and problems, and perhaps sharing and talking and learning from them and with them about some of the difficulties?" To my surprise, they said, "Yeah." And that was really the beginning of moving more towards a therapeutic use of groups and away from the sort of 1950s, 1960s youth work that I'd been involved with prior to that, focusing on program, on content, on action, on doing things. And over a period of years, beginning to move more towards a model of group work with youngsters, which was much more psychologically minded and encouraging them to think about their emotional responses to their environments, their families, their lives, and to think about the implications on them, the impact on their self of those experiences. And really out of that, beginning to sort of develop a language and procedure for working with young people. So that's a long-winded answer to your question about why social work.
Tell me this, was the programs that you were delivering, were they then replicated? Because obviously they were successful.
Those Will Green programs?
Yeah. Like were they replicated by social services and stuff because they'd proven to be quite successful. Yeah. And the other thing you say, sorry for interrupting, is the cost effectiveness. I mean, if you have 10 young people coming in for say 10 counselling sessions once a week, but you have a group that runs for 10 young people for 2 hours a week, it's much more cost effective. And you write quite a lot about how we learn about self as being around the interaction with others. And I always found that group work has a great ability to do that. The other thing that it does for young people is it tells them that story, well, God, I thought my life was shit until I heard theirs.
Yeah. Right, there's a lot of questions in there. Yes, it was a very successful program. We were the only, that was the only center in the whole of the United Kingdom. The whole of the United Kingdom that went from 0 to 17, covered the whole statutory age range. We had a nursery section which went from 0 to 4, and there were people who worked in there with the infants and disturbed infants and mothers. I took over at 4, worked that whole way through. Did about 5 years there. It was very successful and was rolled out in other places. On the back of that, I began to teach in the various universities here. Queen's University, Coleraine, McGee. Only did guest appearances in Jordanstown. I don't think there was a social work course there, so I was teaching on the social work courses and teaching group work. So I think that possibly influenced a generation of social workers who could see, you know, here was a way of thinking about working with youngsters, which was helpful. But that's, you know, as I say, things have moved on hugely since then. And I mean, this was a very early primitive response to the Troubles in Northern Ireland. And once people saw that it was helpful, it did make sense, you know, it was picked up fairly quickly and replicated in other places.
Jarlath, has that work, have you been involved in that work in terms of traumatized adults? Would you be, like, have you been doing years of group work with traumatized adults?
Yeah. Well, what happened from that was after a period of time, as I say, working in that Mill Green Family Centre, I was increasingly involved in teaching and then trying to develop group work as a modality. So yeah. I'm going to answer your question, but I got to go somewhere before that.
Okay. So
I moved to the Belfast Trust about 76, 77, somewhere around there, with a remit to develop and promote group work as a modality in social work. So that involved working, taking some of the ideas that I'd been developing and working with, and both working alongside, co-facilitating with people, running training courses, working with youngsters myself. The problem eventually came to be that I had to leave North, as it was North and West Belfast then, because it was a token commitment to developing group work as a methodology. Genuine, but I wasn't going to get the resources I needed in order to develop that. Partly, and this is where I learned something very important, partly that was because our organizations are not designed along group lines as you and I and youth workers would understand group work. They're triangular, pyramidal, top-down organizations. The emphasis is on individuals. It's on individuals. So you are managed by an individual, you do your work, you're part of a team, but they're not really teams in the sense of group. They're a collection of individuals who provide a service, deliver outcomes, solve problems, whatever. The psychology of the agency is based on individual, the idea of the individual. Even though they talk about family therapy, community work, and so on, actually, group work is it's a very alien concept. And so even though there was a willingness to develop group work, I kept coming up against this internal resistance. It was basically a collision of cultures and a collision of psychologies. So to get to your question, so I found myself in a position where it was no longer possible for me to stay in that organization. So I decided to leave. And I set up in private practice. I was one of the very first, possibly only 2 of us who were in full-time private practice at that point in time in Belfast, in Northern Ireland. You had lots of counselling organisations, marriage guidance as it used to be then, Samaritans, of course, others, but no one actually offering ongoing psychological work with individuals who were suffering either from trauma or emotional difficulties and problems. And so I had been studying throughout this time. I trained in a whole range of different humanistic psychotherapy, trained in the sense of having exposure to them, bioenergetics, transactional analysis, Gestalt. And then I trained in psychosynthesis, which I found to be, for me, really a wonderful context and perspective on the range of preoccupations and dilemmas of the human being. So in terms of my individual work and my group work, I began to offer group therapy for people who had been wounded, damaged, traumatized, and really running the first group work practice in Northern Ireland. And that ran for, well, still continued, not in a private context, because I sort of closed that end down to work to provide group psychotherapy in the NHS. So during that time, obviously, then I found myself working with a whole range of individuals who struggled either from trauma related to the Troubles, trauma related to early childhood experiences or crises that had occurred. And again, learning, subsequently training, I found myself increasingly having to deal with work that I needed more training and support and help with. So I trained as a group analyst about 27, 28 years ago. And that was very, very helpful in providing a scaffolding, again, ways of thinking for work that I'd been doing in the previous sort of 20, 25 years. So I was able to bring a lot of experience and gain a great deal from that. And that helped me. I'd also trained as an individual psychotherapist during this time. So I'd put a lot of time and energy and commitment into upskilling. And as I was finding, having to deal with more and more disturbed, more and more difficult situations.
At what stage along this sort of journey did you write the first edition of Working More Creatively with Groups?
That started out, believe it or not, about 33, 34 years ago. And it came about because I'd said to you earlier, I was teaching in social work courses in the various universities. I was also doing a lot of work around Ireland, working with teachers. And these teachers were in Southern Ireland, were increasingly being expected to develop a curriculum which was really about social skills and health education. I'm talking, say, 35 years ago. And these sort of new ideas were beginning to emerge. And teachers were finding themselves, they might teach geography or history or domestic cooking, but they weren't very good at teaching social skills, health ed, and the drug awareness, all the sorts of programs they were being required to teach. So they found it very difficult to move from that sort of very formal, rigid classroom context to the more informal, group-oriented context that you would be very familiar with from your youth work career. And so there was a whole sort of niche market there where someone like myself could come in, and I was basically trying to help these teachers look at working more creatively in a classroom setting. And as I say, that in addition to the teaching I was doing with social workers in the university, out of all of that came the request. My my student, the people I was working with in the workshops and the courses kept saying, this is really helpful. These are very simple ideas. Do you have handouts? Do you have anything we could read? And you must write this down. Why are you not writing this down? And as I said to you earlier, the texts by and large that were around were really clunky American texts. There were some good people coming out of GB. There was a guy whose name I forget now. He was a sort of mentor to me. He'll come back to me. See, let's see these senior moments, Gary. And he was a sort of supervisor to me, and he had written some group work texts which were again sort of helpful. So he was at a course that I was attending, and I was telling him about these requests and not sure about how to respond. He said, "You must write something. I'll introduce you to my publisher. You must write all of this down." And so he made it happen. And let me see if I can. I'm sorry to have forgotten his name. He was a very influential. Tom, what? Oh. I can't, doesn't matter. I can't, it'll come back to it.
Tom Hamrug?
No. I was I'm sure the guy's in heaven now. Anyway, so that was how the book started about 34 odd years ago. The first couple of chapters, first 2-3 chapters, they just flowed because I'd lived them.
Yeah.
Knew all about them. But then I hit this wall where I didn't know how to take the book forward, lost faith in it. It sat in a drawer for a couple of years. The publishers were hounding me because you have deadlines, and I was breaking all these deadlines, and they insisted that either I complete or we forget about the situation. So my wife Judy organized me one summer up in the roof space in the attic in our house. So I sat at a desk, a pine desk, kitchen table, and in those days I wrote by hand, literally with a biro and paper, and I would cut out sentences that I liked and sellotape them together. I mean, when you think about this is, when you think about what we do with computers now.
Proper old school.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of like Neanderthal. I was literally chiseling into the rock face, and it felt like that. I was literally sort of dragging this out of myself. And anyway, to cut a long story short, the book got published 28 years ago. That book is still older than you, Gary.
I'm telling you. Tell me this. Can you remember the day that you held the first copy in your hand?
I can't. I'm sure it must have been a wonderful experience, but I don't remember.
Well, here's the question. I remember being at your book launch.
Yes, you spoke at that, the third edition.
Yeah, that's right. And I remember the lecturers from the community youth work department up in Jordanstown had brought a lot of students, and they were like children meeting their superhero, and they were coming to me and they were saying, "Gary, like, do you know Jarlath?" And I said, "Yeah, seriously, like, I can't believe you know him." So we're all really excited, and they were really couldn't wait to hear you speak. And the thing that really struck me, and it has continued to strike me, because the book is now in this four editions, and it's renowned worldwide. I often wonder what that must be like. That for you, I mean, it's in terms of expectation from people.
Yeah, it's difficult because I get this because I teach, in Southern Ireland. I teach in England, and I work at the Institute of Psychosynthesis, and there is this sort of pressure to perform. People think, oh, Jarlath is doing this workshop on X, Y, or Z, or we're going along to this course on such and such. And I do feel this sort of expectation from people. Oh, I've been to one of your workshops and it was fantastic. Or I've said to my friends, and I mean, that in saying that, you know, that sounds like arrogance, but actually it's an enormous pressure.
Yeah.
Because, you know, you mightn't believe this, but this is the truth. Every time I start a new course, a new workshop, whether it's a half morning, a day, whatever it happens to be, I'm absolutely convinced this is going to collapse. I'm going to make a fool of myself. So it's that sort of imposter syndrome sort of thing. I can't possibly do this. It's like doing this interview.
Yeah.
When Fergal asked me, I thought, oh shit, here he goes again. Here's Fergal roping me into something that it's the last thing I want to do. And only the fact that you were interviewing me, I said, well, Gary will take care of me because I won't be able to do this on my own. That's true. So it's very difficult. It's because I keep feeling I'm expected to turn up 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
And partly that's self-imposed, but partly it's also sort of an expectation from the audience that I'm going to produce these new insights or give them the essential skills that will transform them into group workers overnight. When really it's hard work.
I think to be honest, Jarlath, that's going to be quite comforting for a lot of youth workers to hear that. Someone with your experience, that even every time you turn up, you're expecting it to go bad, or you're worried that it won't be successful. I experienced that, and I've done lots of group work, and I experienced that quite a lot. And I tell the young people, it's like I go into these situations feeling a bit nervous about doing them. I know they aren't going to kill me, but if you ask me, am I nervous? Yes, so definitely.
Yeah.
So I think definitely for the youth workers, I think it's really, really encouraging. Jarlath, I'm listening. You've experienced quite a lot of pain and trauma just in your younger years. You were talking about that working diva, so you'd seen stuff. On a society, I don't think there's anybody who hasn't seen stuff. And certainly for youth workers, I think what we bring is an amazing ability to build trust and relationships with young people. And a lot of the time, we're the people they will speak to.
Yes.
They don't often choose the clinical model. They can sometimes find it quite intimidating, and often we're the first point of call, the point of contact, because there's something about us that they want to share stuff, but they don't want to share it 4 or 5 times. So I think the question from this is there a place for youth workers to be trained therapeutically to be able to provide group work? Because anxiety rates are through the roof, comms are getting hammered, and they're doing their best under very difficult circumstances. Teachers are constantly saying, like, there's a lot of stuff here and we're not trained to deal with this. Is there a role for youth work to be able to provide this through group work? And if so, where do we access that level of training?
Yeah, well, the simple answer to the first part of your question is I absolutely believe there is a role for youth workers to use their skills and group work experiences more therapeutically.
Yeah.
In terms of where you access such training, it doesn't currently exist to my knowledge. So it may well be that you and your colleagues may need to think about setting up some sort of training. But why would youth workers, let's think about it, why would youth workers, what have they got to bring to the table, to these, as you say, CAMS is getting hammered, there's the anxiety rates, the mental health rates, we know this, are through the roof and going to get worse for the next 10, 15 years. What's the youth worker's skill? Their skill is in as you said, building relationships in groups. Obviously, sometimes you work with individuals, but your group work skills, I think, are central and core. And if you think about what is the central experience of the group? Sharing. Many of the youngsters that I have worked with over the years have been wounded and damaged in relationships. relationships, it's like I say to my students, most of the people who come to me are brokenhearted. They suffer from a broken heart. They long for love and contact and intimacy and relationship, and they're afraid of it. They dread it, and they dread that they're unlovable because of their experiences in the family, in their environment, in all sorts of places. Relationships become something suspect, something hostile. And what the youth worker is, you know, I suppose a bit like myself, as an older brother, the eldest in my family, I was able to relate to youngsters, to young people, able to build relationships. And I think youth workers are very good at that. I think there's something in their own biography that draws people into youth work, which gives them an affinity to build those relationships. But their group work skills are central here, because the youth worker is emphasizing group work values like collaboration, sharing, interaction, working together, bringing youngsters who perhaps have been damaged in relationships, as I say, into these more collegial, cooperative, collaborative relationships. Because some youngsters will only feel safe in, if I use the word, perverse forms of the family. I'm thinking about gangs. Some youngsters have been so damaged in their early groups, their first group, the family, subsequent groups. They only feel safer in groups of their own making with individuals who suffered similarly. So sometimes these are, as I say, distorted versions of the earliest groups where we should be able to practice in safety. So I think youth workers have an enormous amount to bring in terms of the therapeutic use of groups to youngsters who have been broken and wounded by early group experiences, to provide corrective emotional and social experiences in groups. So in terms of the first part of your question, absolutely, youth workers should and could be trained to use their skills more therapeutically. And what an addition that would be to overstretched psychologists, social workers, and so on.
Yeah.
As regards the training, it's not there. Maybe that's something.
Well, what brings me lovely into the next part of the question: have you really retired?
Semi-retired.
Yeah. Okay. So you could possibly be getting tortured again.
I would be open to thinking about that with you and helping you. I have to say, because it sounds like you're winding up, you brought me into West Belfast a long, long time ago. And I often say to my students in London and elsewhere, I work with a whole range of professional people, social workers, psychiatrists, psychologists, etc. The most impressive group of people I work with and have ever worked with are the youth workers from West Belfast. I'm not saying that in a silly or insincere sense. That is my experience, which is why I couldn't say no to Fergal.
Yeah.
Because my experiences with the youth workers, you're activists, you're community workers, you're working in a very traumatized, very broken community, but such impressive people devoted to your work, you know, knowledgeable, constantly wanting to develop. So yes, I'd be willing in some way to help you think your way through towards a training.
Well, look, that's definitely something we're going to look at. I've really only a few other questions, Jarlath. I know we're really tight for time, and we'll leave maybe 10 or 15 minutes for other people. So, in terms of your group work, how would you rate your group dynamics as a father to Emer, Orla, and Leah?
Freud once said, there are three impossible professions. One is being a psychoanalyst, one is being a teacher, and the third is being a parent. So even with all my knowledge, parenting is difficult.
Yeah.
They've been a group. This is going to sound a bit strange. I've observed them in their growth and development since birth, how they interact. I've been able to use some of my group work skills and my knowledge and background, and particularly obviously my own family experiences, to be a different sort of father and provide a different sort of familial experience. And I've had some success in that, but it's an impossible profession.
And the last one, do you know what? I have millions of questions, but so has anything changed since you became a grandfather to Carl, Jamie, and Lola?
Oh yes, oh yeah. I mean, it's such a cliche, Gary, and hopefully you're going to get this experience yourself. But it is a completely different relationship because I'm no longer at the busiest time of my life. This is the busiest time of your life. You're making a living, trying to rear a family, get kids to school, all the rest of that. And so as parents, we're very much under pressure. As a grandparent, you're seeing things. I'm further down the life cycle, so I can see all the mistakes that I made, all the times I wish I hadn't hurried them up or pressured, just sat and been with the children and worried and wondered with them. And grandchildren bring you that.
Yeah.
You know, it's a different way of being with children.
And Jarlath, how important has it been for you throughout this whole journey of yours to have Judy by your side, your wife?
Well, I mean,
who you describe as the best group worker you know.
Yep. We worked together in the Falls Road years where I first met her. She was a senior social worker in Mulholland Terrace. And when I came in, everybody said to her, "Oh, you've got to meet Jarlath Benson. He's great in group work." And they said to me, "Oh, you've got to meet Judy. She's brilliant." And so it was almost as if the environment knew the two of us would be a good working team and brought us together. And it was terrific. So we began to work together. We ran groups together and obviously then got together. And she was a fabulous group worker and great mother, great homemaker, still continues to be, and a rock. Absolutely. Couldn't have done it without her. As I say, even with the book, she has me up the stairs, get that book finished.
You're not getting your dinner until you get chapter 1 done.
That's right.
Jarlath, it's been an absolute pleasure. And I want to thank you. I want to thank you for all the stuff that you did when I was a youth worker in the Upper Springfield, because it undoubtedly has inspired an awful lot. The Upper Springfield is an area that has blew me away in terms of its generosity, and it's the people, it's organic. And they just continue to impress me because it was all about possibility and potential. But there wasn't this hang up about what we didn't get. What I always got from the Upper Springfield and the people within it was energy and positivity. And you came along and really encouraged us to think that it's all right if things don't go right within your groups, but have a go, because that's how you learn.
Yeah.
And real honesty, and that's what we always got, and compassion and humanity. So I want to thank you for today.
Thank you, Gary, and you really took care of me. Thank you.
Very welcome.
I knew I'd be safe with you.
So I think we're wondering, I think it's opening for questions. Let me see if we have any. Do you know of any of those people from the groups? So Phil Glennon has said, just in relation to the group work training, they had brought some. So Phil Glennon from Northern Ireland Youth Forum, if anybody wants to contact him, is saying that they received 5 days of training on adolescent trauma. Yeah, staff loved it. So anybody wants to contact Phil and get information about that.
Just give me a second. Someone knocking on the door here.
Okay.
This is what happens with Zoom, isn't it?
Why you said you'll have to go to get your own.
Yep. This is what happens when you live in a village. Go ahead. What was that?
So Phil Glennon, Phil says, have a wee question, Gary, but I haven't seen it yet.
I know Phil. Yeah.
No, I'd be happy enough to ask it now, Gary.
Oh, great. Phil's there. Where you go,
Hiya,
Phil?
Thank you, Gary.
Hello, Phil.
Jarlath?
Hello,
Good
Phil.
to see you. So, well, I've two questions, right? One was, have you ever thought about writing your own book about yourself? Because I could probably sit and listen to that all day long in terms of the journey, like. And then the second question was, obviously we've just come through a year of COVID there, and like, how do you think that, like, what do you think the long terms maybe effects are going to be on mental health with that, just overall, like, in relation to young people, like?
Well, in terms of your first question, Phil, I have never once, honestly, never ever thought about writing a biography. But now that you've suggested it, if I think about it, I'd never thought about it. Secondly, in terms of the COVID thing, you know, for us as group workers, this COVID has been an amazing experience. You know, you as a group worker, I suppose like me, will have been aghast at how much this pandemic has undermined the basis of what it means to be a social group animal, social distancing. You know, all of this, you know, we can't hug each other, we can't contact each other except through Zoom, we have to work at home. I mean, in some ways, this pandemic has struck at what it means to be a human, because what it means to be a human is to be a group animal. The ancient Greeks, in ancient Greece, the definition of madness was a person who lived outside the group. They couldn't understand how people would live outside a group, like a hermit or a recluse. And COVID has really, you know, caused us to look at what it is that makes us human beings. Going forward, I think is going to be very interesting, you know, because already what have been hearing for some time from people, there are two groups of people in my psychotherapy practice. One group of people for whom lockdown has been brilliant. COVID has been great in the sense they stay at home, they don't have to pretend, they don't have to put their makeup on, the face on, they don't have to go out and pretend all is well. They can just stay at home. Another group of people who are desperate to get out and get back to normality. So I think going forward, you know, is going to be a blend of, you know, still feeling other people are potentially dangerous, but we also need them. So we're going to have to sort of manage a lot of dilemmas and irreconcilable opposites, I think, going forward.
Thanks, Phil. There's a question from Pierce, where he's talking about the amount of books that you have behind you, and he's asking, have you read them all? And he's also asking the question, have you ever stole ideas? Has there ever been someone you've stolen an idea or resource from?
Have I read them all? That's only one room. Is that Pierce?
Yeah.
This is only one room, Pierce. There's another room behind, stacked to the ceiling with books. My wife is constantly going into that room and reading, and I'll come in and half my books have gone. Have I read them all? No. I've dipped into all of them and extracted bits from all of them. Most of them I've read some of, and the rest I intend to get round to in the next 30, 40 years. As regards stealing ideas, yes, I'm a magpie. I couldn't, with all these books, and as I said to you, my grandmother introduced me to a whole world. So I steal ideas from people from 2,000 years ago, from different cultures, from the present. Hopefully, I refashion them through my own experience and make them my own. So the ideas that I borrow, the notions that I pick up, hopefully I filter them through my own experience, and that gives them authenticity. Otherwise, they don't mean anything.
I've a question here, Jarlath, from an old colleague of mine. I think it's Linda Thompson. We know that youth work is under-resourced and undervalued and remains vulnerable to cuts. What do you think could happen if the transformative role of youth work goes? There's two questions, and the last one is, how do you think gender can impact on the dynamics of a mixed group?
Right. So the first one is about, what's that?
Yeah.
Resources are being cut. So
yeah. What do you think could happen if the transformative role of youth work goes?
Well, I don't think the transformative role of youth work goes, because people have been working with youngsters from the beginning of time. I don't believe for a moment that just because resources are undercut or youth clubs might close, that very committed people still won't be wanting to make connection with young people. And again, my hope is that coming out of this pandemic is a recognition that the mental health and emotional well-being of children and young people has suffered hugely. So my hope is that there will be a big investment in youth work services. And already we're beginning to see signs of that across the water, where people are recognizing that the closure of youth clubs has contributed hugely to things like knife crime and so on. So hopefully youth work will continue to be transformative. And the second question, what was that?
How do you think gender can impact on the dynamics of a mixed group?
Hugely. As I said, I worked with my wife in some groups, and in some groups, she was seen as the maternal authority from their own homes, where I was the soft touch, a bit like the absent fathers of their home or the kindly fathers. In other situations, the roles might be reversed. So I think where I have worked with and continue to work with in the Centre for Psychotherapy, in some of my groups, I take trainee psychiatrists in, and on occasion they have been female. So again, we're very alert to how typical, traditional, stereotypical gender associations get worked out, get superimposed on us. So we're often trying to sort of frustrate those, create surprise. But and it may be that in some situations we have to sort of reverse with a female colleague. We sort of reverse roles or create situations where we can explore and look at those sort of associations. But it does impact hugely.
Yeah. We have a question from Paul Dines. Hello, Jarlath.
Yes, hello, Paul. I remember Paul.
My mother grew up in Divis in the 1970s and says she would have been part of the youth work activities run in the community, so thank you. And he asked the question, what has been the most challenging group situation you've ever had to deal with, and what did it teach you?
The first thought that comes to mind is I had a psychotherapy group in Purdysburn, which I used to refer to as the group from hell. They were the group from hell because they were extremely disturbed women and one or two men. And they drove me bonkers. They drove me absolutely mad because they were so disturbed. They would behave in just very, very crazy ways, and just simply trying to get them to sit on a seat and talk to each other and talk to me. They would get up, wander around, tap me on the shoulder with a rolled up newspaper, or crazy. But I couldn't give up on them because everybody else had given up on them, which is why they got to me. And I suffered through several years, maybe 5 years with that group. And what I learned was that is a time to say enough. I can do no more. I have limits.
Yeah.
I have limitations. That I'm not a superhero, even though you introduced me as a superhero. I don't have superpowers. And that sometimes it's important to say, I can't continue with this. I'm not going to indulge this. I'm not going to collude with this. Enough. Something else is required. Group work cannot solve every human problem.
And I think we'll take one more, Jarlath, and it's from Dominic. I think it's Dominic Mooney, who works for Include Youth. Jarlath, where does the youth work in 10 to 20 years' time?
Well, I think it goes back to your question about the therapeutic dimension of youth work and youth group work. And my hope, and I believe in 10, 15, 20 years' time, youth work will be a multi-dimensional profession. Already you're in schools.
Yeah.
You're in Hyde Bank. You're in a whole range of institutions which traditionally worked with their clientele in particular ways, but are finding that no longer works. And there's something about the creativity, spontaneity, and innovative ways of thinking that youth workers who work off their feet, on their intuition, on their initiative, and are very creative. I think traditional institutions desperately need that. So for me, in 10, 15, 20 years' time, youth work is a multi-dimensional profession offering skilled therapeutic work with children, youngsters who need that, working in institutions which need shaken up and need the creativity. So I would be very positive about where youth work is in 10 years' time.
I promised you that we wouldn't go beyond 2:15, and there's 2 minutes to go, so I'd like to leave that just for a live verbal to close, maybe, and to thank you again on behalf of everyone.
Thanks very much, Guy. Thanks very much, Jarlath. I think if everybody's happy enough to knock their cameras off, they can actually give a vocal round of applause for Jarlath and Guy. That was fantastic. Carja, again, I want to thank us. I mean, I think everybody will be agreed that was a fantastic event, and we have recorded it, and we're hoping to put it up on YouTube for anybody who missed out and who would be able to avail of it. I just, again, I suppose the same as the rest of us, my head is swimming with ideas. Jarlath has made a bit of a semi-commitment there to help us think through some type of training. And again, this is the type of stuff that we're talking about, because we fell in the gCloigíní Gorma. This was our attempt to try and find through creative ways at looking at communal healing. And I suppose that the ethos of the Féile was the very point that Jarlath had made at the start, that as individuals, we are nobody, and we can only work as a collective. We can only work as a community. And I think last week, the very inspirational victory of the families in Ballywarrahu with their long campaign was indicative of what the resilience, myself and Guy talked about this yesterday, the resilience of the community around us. And the fact that it took them 27 years to come together is also indicative of the fact that a lot of our pain and our trauma can be hidden and can be repressed before someone has the inspiration to bring people together. And I think that our festival has never been more pertinent than after the year of COVID, as Phil outlined there, where people are isolated, they're on their own, and the festival is about reconnecting and bringing people together again. And this evening, for example, we have Scríbhneoirí a Tléamh, which is a local writers group, again, which is another element of our collective therapy that we're talking. People are going to be writing the poems and the songs and the memoirs that they have been writing over the past year, where they've had a chance to maybe have that space to reflect and think through some of the stuff that we've came through as a community. But we hope to build on that. And maybe, as myself and Gary talked about yesterday, it's an opportunity to think about something holistic that can bring together all the elements that we can bring to the table to try and help our people and help our young people in the time ahead. So we've got all your email addresses. Thanks for registering, and we're going to be bombarding you with more information about Féile. There's a sunrise yoga on Black Mountain, at the top of Black Mountain at 6 p.m. There's going to be meeting at 5:45 at Newhill, if anybody wants to jump on that. And if anybody also wants to pop their head down to the Raiders event, which is outdoor, that'll be at 9 p.m. But Gorma I want to thank Gary and Jarlath again for what was a fantastic event, and we'll be in touch. Gorma
Thanks, Pearl.